The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Jayne and Phillips. My name is Bruce Southworth, a book reviewer for Publishers Weekly, New Mystery Magazine, and Drood Review. Ms. Phillips' new book, Shelter, was just published by Houghton Mifflin, September of 1994. It's her second novel. Her first novel was Machine Dreams, published in 1984. She's also published several collections of short stories, including Fast Lanes, Sweethearts, Black Tickets. She won the Sue Kaufman Award, I believe it is, for Black Tickets, and has had 2 National Endowment for the Arts fellowships, has taught at Boston University and Brandeis University, and many other literary awards, which would take up, the rest of the program probably. It's welcome very much. It's a very pleasure to meet you.
Well, it's good to be here.
Great. I wanted to ask you kind of, the prologue to the book, to Shelter, is a short paragraph which describes the cots in a girls' camp and so on. And I've read that you wrote that quite a long time ago, and it was a sort of just the germ of an idea. When did you write that, and how much time elapsed between that and actually creating Shelter?
Well, I would say I wrote it 15, 16 years ago, before actually I had written any other books.
Mm-hmm.
And I put it away in a notebook. I sort of keep a notebook of lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept it, for many years and sort of had it in mind, but not in any really active way. And when I finished, after Fast Lanes came out, I was, for some reason, moved to look at it again. And I think I wrote Shelter to find out what that paragraph was about, why it had a kind of an edge that still interested me.
It's, in and of itself, it's fairly plain. Again, it's just kind of a description of the bunk and bunk room and so on, as I recall, and just a flash of kind of a normal camp scene, and to springboard from that to something that is essentially fairly dark and an exploration of good and evil and coming of age and all the rest of it seems to be quite a leap.
I think the thing that pulled me into it, though, was the mention of the future and the idea of those arrows moving off from where these children stood at that moment in their lives.
I hadn't thought about it that way. I keep thinking more of a lot of your work, a lot of it has to do with escape in a way, going away from something or having gone away from something and being alienated.
Anytime you're escaping, you're moving towards something else.
That's true. That's a very positive way to look.
I think of it in terms of descent almost, because I like for the characters in the book or the reader really to descend into the world of the book,
mm-hmm.
and to be completely one with it almost.
I read an interesting comment of yours about that same idea for one of your short stories, which is a rather grim subject, lechery. It's
mm-hmm.
about a young girl who's a teenager who's a prostitute, and that you chose the first person for that story for pretty much that reason, to bring the reader right into it, to help them experience what she's experiencing. And is that something that you do fairly consciously in a lot of your stories, to kind of surprise the reader, get them someplace before they realize they're there?
Well, the decision is never conscious
mm-hmm.
on my part, but I think material should dictate form. And I write very much like a poet in that I write line by line and I almost write by ear, so that I don't sort of think ahead of time I'm going to write a story about someone who's a foster child and who is sort of out there on her own at a very young age. I mean, I think of that story as the voice of this person who really is trying to make an alternate family out of nothing but shards of happenstance.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, she has a very, a kind of impermeable core. I think language itself leads me into the work. I mean, I really start from a first line,
mm-hmm.
and I move from there to the second, and language itself tells me who the character is.
I did want to ask you about Shelter is so carefully, it seems very carefully crafted. The language is very eloquent. It must have taken a long time to construct.
Well, it's very interior, and the language is sometimes very dense. It tries to almost pull together a collective consciousness. It has almost, well, someone said to me, a kind of metaphysical edge, in that the characters in some instances seem to almost read each other's minds. And technically it moves through four points of view. Linny, the elder sister, who's 15, Alma, the younger sister, who is 11, the little boy, Buddy, who is 8. These are all not first person, but third person points of view. And Parson, the loner, the interloper in the camp, who may be a menacing figure or an agent of protection, and that's sort of unclear.
He's a fascinating character. We've identified a section of the book maybe you could read, and that'll give us a sense of Parson a bit, I think.
I could say, too, that the connection between Parson and the other male character in the book, Buddy, the son of the camp cook, is in a way the turning point in the book, the moral force in the book. And his stepfather, Carmody, has returned from prison after 5 years. Parson has been a cellmate for a time of Carmody's and considers Carmody to be really demonic, and has followed him to the site of the camp. And this is kind of a looking back at their connection to one another. In prison, he'd watched Carmody carefully. Carmody, long and lank, his faded, wheat-colored hair and squinty eyes, his face that was not young, with its callow, unfinished look, showing always an edge of the rabbity anger that caused him to hang back, scheming, while his cohorts strutted and preened. Carmody moved, not seeming to move, planned while he appeared to sleep. Parson dreamed Carmody was water, an elongated sheen not unlike Turtle Hole in color and brilliance, an oval water that moved along the edges of things like a shade or a ghost. A water that moved up walls, through bars, edged past the warrens of cells along the main corridor of the prison, water that glistened, featureless and flat, probing, searching to take on any shape, any color, anything to get out. For some of them, prison was no worse than what they'd lived through, but prison broke Carmody up. He was wild to finish his time, afraid of the wardens, afraid of the other men. He even seemed afraid of his wife and kid, or afraid to see them. The wife, a big woman gone to fat, and the kid a pale towhead, quick and thin, darting beside her like a shadow tethered to a string. Before their rare visits, Carmody was jumpy. He said his old lady was a nut for God. She and Parson would get on, but Parson wasn't much for women, was he? And Carmody laughed. Parson could smell the fear on him, a bitter vegetable smell like rotted seeds and pulp. For a while they'd shared a cell in D Block. Carmody flowed from one side to the other, pacing in the dark, ranting about the block bosses and their gophers until he knelt in the corner and beat at the wall with his fist, a rhythmic pounding punctuated by frantic whispers. I gotta be a good boy, gotta be a good boy, kill them, fuck them, until Parson dragged him by the back of his shirt to the bunks and prayed over him. Oh Christ, Carmody would mutter, struggle like a cat in a sack. Shut up, you crazy loon. They all know you're crazy. Why the hell do you think they leave you alone? But the praying always worked, and Parson was strong enough to hold Carmody still, hold him in the healing grip of the Heavenly Father, and press hard against the evil, press hard and shake the devil loose.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Parson, as he starts out, you do get a sense, or I think maybe the reader begins to think that, as you say, this is going to be a sort of a maniacal figure, a dangerous figure. And as the book sort of progresses, he does become, in a sense, a protector of Buddy at the end. I wanted to ask you about the snake that is contained there. There's at one point they find a black snake, and this seems to represent a variety of things. For Buddy, it seems to represent protection. For Parson, it seems to represent sort of a retribution that he can what do I want to say, for carmody, you know, punishment, basically. And Lenny, who sees this thing, the young girl, when she first encounters it, she sees sort of flowered vines, really. She doesn't really see it as a snake.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of ask you about the symbolism of the snake. It's maybe the biblical, you know, representation of the devil. But at the same time, it seems to mean so many things. And I'm also curious as to what was going on in Lenny's mind that she would see this as vines. It kind of lost me there, I have to admit.
Well, Parson, from the beginning, his consciousness is out there.
Mm-hmm.
He is what we would call today a psychic, if you will. I mean, he's able to pick up other people's thoughts. I mean, if you've ever gone to a psychic who, in fact, does read minds, they don't really read, they read totally out of context.
Mm-hmm.
They might read, I see you on a sailboat, a green sailboat, and they mention some very detailed thing that they couldn't have made up. Yet they don't know where that sailboat is or at what point this will happen, and it's all very jumbled. Like riding on a streetcar very quickly so
Mm-hmm.
that everything is a blur. And that, in a way, is the way things come to Parson. And basically, Lenny makes a couple of references later in the book when she's thinking back on the encounter with Parson. It says very clearly that he doesn't touch her.
Mm-hmm.
She sort of touches him lightly. But it feels to her as though he's a kind of magician, as though maybe he hypnotized her. That she's almost seeing the spirit of what she's really looking at, which is the snake.
So in a sense, that represents maybe a sense that she's not meant to see danger there, perhaps.
Well, she really clearly doesn't see danger.
Yeah.
The danger that she feels has to do with things that happened to her in the past, that the experience with Parson almost opens up for her. I mean, it's always tricky to talk about symbols
Mm-hmm.
in a book, and it's something I really kind of avoid doing, because I think what the writer wants to do is to establish a literal reality that is sort of effortlessly symbolic. I mean, I think all the animals in the book would be there
Mm-hmm.
naturally,
Right.
and they come into the world of the sort of the primal ground of this campground in a very natural way. And what they become after that, in a way, is almost up to the reader, because I think language does have a kind of sensory connection to the reader. And one thing I really wanted to do, I guess, you know, in all my work, you know, sort of we were talking about before, is to pull the reader right into the consciousness of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the most amazing things about language is that when we read to ourselves, it's such an intimate experience, because we really put the voice of our sort of mind's eye, our mind's voice, into the language of the book, so that it's almost as though we're thinking it.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that's very, very effective about this, is the shifting perspective of the characters, because you as the reader flow from one person to another and start to see the connections and reestablish some of the relationships, and it does draw you in tremendously into the book to try and figure out, you know, what
I
did
guess
they see?
the one thing that I've always tried to do is to mimic the flow of perception itself. That's the fascinating thing to me about language, that it can approximate a kind of simultaneity of time, the way
Mm-hmm.
we do in our thoughts, you know, that memories and dreams and thoughts and heard dialogue are all sort of mixed up.
Mm-hmm. Kind of snatches here and there that are pieced back together. I'm going to change directions for a moment and talk, ask you about, well, you just said you really don't want to talk about symbols, but I want to ask you about another one real quickly. Water is prevalent in here, the passage that you read about Carmody being like water. And there was another, Turtle Hole itself, the swimming hole, and the river that's running through. The other one that I thought was very interesting was the reference to an early episode in Parsons' life where a man that he had been living with, basically his mentor,
His foster father.
foster father, who was just known as Preacher.
Mm-hmm.
Preacher had been shot. They were escaping, essentially. They were driving in this truck, and he hit a woman who, I can't remember the exact phrasing that you used, but kind of flowed up to the top of the car. She became rather like a fish to him. And it's just this whole sense of water, a sense of flowing through the book, I thought was really very interesting.
Well, it describes a scene in which it has snowed, and he struggles down the fire escape of this hotel where this altercation has taken place, sort of carrying Preacher. And they get into the truck, and as they get into the truck, a sort of sleety rain has started sort of sluicing down over the windshield. And when he hits the girl, it's partly because he's in a kind of panic, and partly because it's raining so hard, and she sort of falls against the windshield. And she becomes, in his mind, a fish. And she physically resembles Lenny, you know, slightly in terms of her coloring. And so there's some corresponding sense there when he first sees Lenny at Turtle Hole.
Yeah, kind of a flashback. And it's very interesting because, again, the snow, the sleeting rain, everything is present as it should be, but it's just his perception of it is so interesting. I think he's probably my favorite character in the book.
He's aware of everything as though it's constantly happening. That is, he feels that he sees that girl constantly, that he hasn't really put any distance between himself and that vision.
Change gears a little bit, the relationship between Buddy and his mother. I mean, there's an element of shelter there. He feels protected by her. But a lot of your short stories also have some very interesting relationships between mostly daughters and mothers. Is that something that you particularly like to explore, something out of your own life, that your relationship with your mother, or just a mother-daughter relationship sort of generically, that is interesting to explore?
Well, it's just very loaded and dense with meaning, I think. Obviously, I mean, my relationship with my mother was central, I think, in my becoming a writer. And I'm of the opinion that, or at least many writers I've met, often had very intense relationships with their mothers. I suppose I feel that writers are sort of formed or sort of on that path by the time they're rather young children. That is, they have those kinds of perceptions that may later be followed through or evidenced in writing. And I think there's a redemptive element to writing, that you're trying to save something from vanishing, make a life that might have vanished meaningful. Sometimes you're inventing those lives, but they always have elements of the real, sometimes culled from, you know, a number of different real people. And I think there can be no stronger sort of power in a child's life than to save his or her mother. That urge never to be abandoned by that first sort of protective form of love, hopefully love, you know, that we experience. And for Buddy, you know, he has felt very protected, partly because they're very isolated, and she has sort of managed, she doesn't stand between him and anything, which is the real trick as a parent, that he is sort of in control, or not in control, but he really moves effortlessly in the world that he knows, the world of the woods and the road and the house and the fields. And when Carmody comes back, he suddenly realizes that this is something she can't protect him from, that in fact she can't protect herself. And he feels that he has to protect her, and he's looking for a way to do that.
I was thinking of earlier when you were just talking, flashes of things. One of your short stories, I think it's a poem, Shapes. Is this the one with the mother and daughter making crescent rolls, I think?
Yeah, that's a very old poem.
It goes back a ways. And what I just kind of thinking about it in the context of the parent-child relationship, and just snatches of things that occur when something triggers a thought in your mind. And that's what really occurred to me when I was reading that it was maybe a sense of place, a sense of smell might trigger this memory, this conversation. And as a result, you know, as the reader, it kind of reminded me going off in those particular directions too. As that poem and lots of other of your poems and short stories, you have mean, you've worked in a lot of different forms, and I think you've mentioned your line-by-line writing of your novels, but your basis in poetry has probably really been the kind of the building block for the novels that you've done, for Machine Dreams and Shelter as well.
Well, I guess I think of my work as being, or I try to stay with a kind of organic way of writing. I suppose instead of thinking about the work, I try to work through image or through sensory composites in language. I mean, it's amazing. Language, even like a word like blue or scarlet, there's a whole kind of cosmology in that word that we don't have to be consciously aware of. And when you begin to sort of jumble those words together and juggle them and shape them, you know, you're keyed into a whole thing that you don't really have to think about.
So you're working in a framework that the reader's already familiar with, sort of, and then just sort of playing with it?
Yeah, subconsciously we're familiar with it. You know, all the history of language is sort of in our minds as we talk and as we read. And in that sense, I feel as though language really, you know, leads the writer in the same way that it leads the reader.
I wanted to ask you, there's a passage in the book. Carmody is an abusive person to Buddy, and there's a scene between the two of them which is very powerful, and it sort of jumps out at you. I don't want to reveal it here for the people who will go on to read the book, but in the sense of the language that's very plainly put, it's not quite as, I don't know, mystical perhaps, you've used the term, but it's very straightforward what happens there. And I wanted to ask you if that was a difficult thing to write. Now, you're a mother and a wife and so on. Are things like that difficult when you're...
Well, I think writing is difficult. I mean, I think the writer is always at risk. The writer should be at risk in the book. And I think one reason I wrote this book was to sort of move through my feelings of vulnerability. I mean, I think there's a certain invincible sense that we have of ourselves as young people. And somehow when we have children, we are immediately so much more vulnerable than we ever felt as sort of separate identities. And the sections about Buddy and Carmody almost wrote themselves. They had a kind of scary directness that was very difficult. And as I say, in the beginning of the book, it wasn't clear to me what was going to happen. I didn't sort of plot the book out. I almost sort of followed it through, that there was a sense of inevitability about what would happen. I mean, I see the book almost as a kind of passion play, with the children as first witnesses and then participants. It's as though they're involved in a kind of very dark quest, yet there are these miraculous interventions at almost every turn.
There's so much going on in so many levels. I mean, there's that element, and there's Parsons' relationship with Carmody and Buddy's relationship with his mother, and then there's the layer of the sort of normalcy, if you will, of the woman who's running the camp and the two camp counselors who are just sort of out there, and there's this sort of nice sheen of this is the outside, and if you get outside, everything would look just like a normal girl summer camp would, with all this other stuff going on.
Like life itself.
Yeah, exactly. You know, looking at houses as you drive by, you wonder, you know, what sort of evil, dark things are going on inside them.
Or what sort of miraculous things.
That too, yeah. Let's take the positive view of it for a bit of different. Do you have something else that you're working on now after Shelter? Are you actively working on some more short stories, another novel, or?
I'm working on something.
and you're not sure what it's going to be, huh?
I think it's probably a novel. I mean, I really like the long endurance way of working with something for a number of years. The life process of it is better for me right now. I think about something for a while before I actually start working on it. And I see too that, you know, I've sort of thought about books for years sometimes, and I actually, this is the book that I'm thinking of doing next, is a book I was going to do before I did this book. So I've really been thinking about it all along.
You've done some interesting things in Machine Dreams. The novel actually spans several decades, and this book is a very compressed time frame. Then the next one, is that going to fall somewhere between the two or take the same tack? I mean, you seem to transition between
Well,
these.
the technical bit sort of comes later. I think first I have a sense of the world of the book, and then somehow the language of it will begin to tell me how I should do it technically.
I was curious as to, this has nothing to do with language really, other than a reception of your own language, but so many of the reviews that you've received over the years have been just absolutely glowing and such great positive criticism. Do you have to tend to ignore those and just sort of put them out of your mind, or try and figure out a way to, how am I going to top that? Is that
Well,
difficult?
I'm so self-censoring that when I read a good review, it kind of flows past me. If I read a review that has quibbles or that has that's really actually hates the book, I take it totally to heart. So I don't know. It's out. That's on the level of personality almost, and it doesn't really come into the actual world of the writing, which is a very isolated world. I think that's more akin to a kind of meditative state than it is to thinking or working, even. I mean, I never think of writing as a career. There's really nothing about it that's like a career. It's more like a way of life or a calling.
It's something you must do. If you weren't writing, what would you be doing, do you think?
I hate to think. No, I mean, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
I would be maybe a photographer, or I would run a rummage shop.
Well, that's interesting. The photographic I can see, because there's that element of the creativity, but the rummage shop. Well, you certainly give people a chance to sort of rummage around in their own minds with the works that you do, and we have run out of time, essentially. I want to thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.